Hello and welcome to Responsible Business Live, a special Business in the Community broadcast produced by Sky. I'm Anna Jones and I'll be your host for this afternoon. Today we'll be looking back on the unprecedented circumstances this year which are fundamentally changing the nature of work and the corporate institution. As well as navigating the impact of the pandemic, this major change is forcing business leaders to rethink their role in this new world. So in this special programme, we'll be looking at how the corporate sector has responded to the COVID crisis and what the challenges are to building back responsibly. We'll find out what business in the community and its members have been doing this year and what their actions have achieved. And we've deliberately decided to share with you a mixture of videos and discussion to bring that all to life. We'll also be hearing from BITC's founding patron, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and from our special guests, former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and BITC's new chair, Gavin Patterson, President and Chief Revenue Officer of Salesforce. And with me now are Amanda Mackenzie, Business in the Community's Chief Executive, and Jeremy Darroch, Group Chief Executive of Sky and Chair of BITC. So a proper welcome to both of you. And Jeremy, to you first of all, what an extraordinary year. BITC is a charity of responsible business. So what do you feel has been the impact of the pandemic on companies this year?
Well, it's been a unique year. I think none of us really can remember anything like it. And it strikes me as a year where the normal rules of business, if you like, the playbook that we go to, has largely been thrown out the window. So it's been a year, I think, where many businesses have really had to get back to fundamentals and think about what's really important to their business and what's important about their footprint. And I've been really impressed, I think, by how so many businesses have reached out and thought about taking care of customers, looking after their staff responsibly, really thinking about their impact in the communities in which they live and thrive. And I think these things are really, really important because it hopefully reminds everybody of the important role that all businesses can play, big or small, and what a cohesive force in society business can be. So I think, in many respects, we'll hope we'll not see a year quite like it again, and that future years will be easier. But I suspect for many businesses, there'll be the chance to really learn about what their broader impact can be and carry forward many of those positives and make them just a normal way of doing business every year.
And Amanda, what has BITC learned during this year? And has anything in particular surprised you?
I think the business's capacity for compassion, for thought, for agility, you could have argued it would have been a year when everyone would have just settled down, battened down and done not a lot that was beyond what they might describe as their day job. But actually, I think the whole world of responsible business has become more intrinsic, which is fabulous. And then if you look at the impact and how business has responded to the death of George Floyd, the programmes on well-being, and I would say actually business is back in the community. I mean, what it's done in the community is quite phenomenal.
Well, yes, an example of business in the community members reacting at speed is, of course, the National Business Response Network, set up to help communities who are in desperate need of help. So tell us a little bit about how something like that comes about. Explain how the network works and what you've actually achieved this year with it.
Okay, well, it came about as the pandemic was on the horizon in March, and our team were phenomenal about going, there's something here which takes us back to our roots. And we've got to somehow find a way to link businesses and their gives, because they were volunteering to give, be it services, logistics, or goods. How can we get those to the front line, to the communities of greatest need? And massively helped by our brilliant founding supporters. It meant within 5 weeks we were able to raise the funds that mean we can run it for a year and a half. And so we got cases where we had to be quite in the ingenuity around thinking, okay, where's this unused airline food? Can we get that to the front line? But that does require refrigerated lorries, insert Hertz, and then FareShare. So it's an amazing collaboration of food banks and business and getting things like that. Or BP, they've supplied hundreds and hundreds of laptops to kids who we know were really struggling, having to learn from a smartphone in the middle of the pandemic, to a brilliant case in Wales where Accenture helped us build an app to help people be safer in no time at all, because there's been an increase in prostitution, a terrible thing. You'd rather that didn't happen, but actually what's happened is that they're now, at least now, safe. So businesses have stepped up phenomenally. We've got 2,500 examples like that, not probably all at that scale. We've now added up, we've helped at least 500,000 people.
Extraordinary stuff. And you've both talked about collaboration there and the power of the BITC network when it comes together. So let's take a look at some of the results of that collective action through this platform.
The National Business Response Network brings together businesses and organisations. It links them and what they can offer with communities in their hour of need.
We take surplus food from the supply chain and redistribute it to charity groups across the North East. When lockdown first came in, we saw both an increase in supply and demand. We're very fortunate that we had very good support from the food service industry.
We were used to catering for 400,000 or 500,000 passengers a week, and we had a lot of food. So it was a natural thing for us to reach out and say, what can we do with it? And Tiffin, our sandwich supplier, we continued to produce sandwiches with them that we donated to Fair Share, around about 10,000 a week.
Volunteers that we've had from LNER have been enormously helpful. Having people coming in from a professional environment like LNER means that they come in willing and ready to get stuck in, and they really want to sort of help out and make a difference.
After the first month of being here, when they gave us the stats of how many people were fed, how much food was sent out, I thought, wow, that is a lot of people in the North East that we've been able to make sure can eat. So I felt a bit proud of myself, but also proud of everyone that was working in here as well.
We were so busy that we were sort of struggling with the logistics and the distribution of the face covering packs to go out. So I approached a business in the community and asked them just for a little bit of advice. They came back to me with the potential of using the largest retailer in Northern Ireland.
I was contacted a few months back to ask if we could get involved in some way with the logistical side of the project. We have 470 stores in Northern Ireland, so if there's not something we could have done, then there was something wrong.
So we selected 21 hubs, post offices across Northern Ireland, and from that our stitchers were able to come in, pick up a face covering pack, take it home, stitch it up, and then bring the finished face coverings back.
A lot of women during lockdown have felt very isolated, alone, and that's something that comes with being a survivor of domestic abuse anyway. With Verizon, what they were able to do is give me training on Zoom, which allowed me to have a safe room where I was able to hold the support groups.
It's part of who we are, enabling our people to share their skills and provide support, and there's a passion in the business to support the local communities in a way that's real.
The help that we got from Verizon has made a huge difference to the delivery of our services. We had a client, she was saying that her back was hurting, but she was still with her perpetrator in the property. So we advised her, you know, it's really good for you to get to a GP. Now, it wasn't a bad back, she actually had cigarette burns on her back, but at that point there she was able to speak to us and us to put the best levels of support in place.
With the lockdown, there is no face-to-face, so it's an issue. So it's like, how do we reach these people and how do they get in touch with us? We're good at building software, we're good at supporting our businesses going online. Why don't we use that to help?
Gaurav was absolutely phenomenal. He helped build our website. He helped me to understand how we could deliver a project at scale and at pace remotely. And we're now seen locally as the largest provider of digital inclusion support in the Highlands.
And it became really apparent really quickly that, for example, when schools closed and children were having to go and work from home, not everybody has the same opportunity to access online learning, and that, you know, we could see opportunities for us to be able to help in our communities. NBRN gives us the opportunity to make a real tangible difference in people's lives.
So he had meningitis when he was 8 months old, which ended up in limb loss, both his legs through knee, and all of his digits on both hands until he had reconstruction surgery on them.
I'd spoken to Terry and asked if there was anything that Taylor was struggling with, and it was a laptop or something at home.
So having the laptop had a massive help where he was able to go onto the online schooling and different websites, furthering his knowledge through his maths and his phonics. So it just made a massive difference.
I want to work on it.
That really makes you think, doesn't it? It's so impressive to see so many businesses getting involved. So thank you to all of you who have given to date. And I just want to update you as well now on what's currently needed. There's a 200% increase in the urgent need for food, as well as help with storage and distribution. Since the start of the second lockdown, there's been a 4-fold increase in requests for PPE in the northwest of England. And there are so many requests like this one, a community organisation in Bristol literally unable to operate without some urgent tech support to keep in touch with their clients. So if your business can help with any of these or any of the other requests, do please ring this number, 0300 303 3993. And Amanda, businesses can learn an awful lot, can't they, from the response that this pandemic has galvanised. While there is hope that we may emerge from this in the not too distant future when a vaccine is rolled out, what do you see as the priorities for business at that point in the months and years ahead?
Well, we did quite a big piece of work towards the end of the summer. We asked about 600 of our members, and that involves 75 businesses. And that work was, as you can imagine, a pretty huge piece of research, which was then distilled down into what I hope will be 4 questions. But the essence of it was, what will it take to build back responsibly? And I'm just going to read them because I think that's just, there's power in their simplicity, which is, what if everyone felt included at work? What if your job was good for you? What if taking action on the climate crisis was everyone's business? And what if no one was left behind? And I think those 4 themes are the ones that emerge, that pretty much every business we talked to said, yep, we're going to accelerate our efforts to do that. So if I give you a few examples before I talk, Sky, of course, have been exemplary and brilliant on this, but we saw GSK come out not only wanting to get to net zero by 2030, but they want to have a net positive impact on nature. So they've taken it one step forward. I don't know if anyone's seen the Diageo announcements last week. Again, just the crystal clarity of really pushing through on this and not letting up. Burger King, I love this story that they've discovered that a small amount of lemongrass in the cattle feed reduces methane by 1/3. I mean, what an incredible story, though. Suddenly, you know, you're beginning to challenge things that we all thought was probably not possible. And importantly, they've made that open source. So everyone can take that learning and start there. And so we can accelerate the good things that are going to happen. And then at the other extreme, Lloyds Banking Group, knowing that people were working from home and not for everyone was that a safe environment, basically offered a helpline and a safe space for everyone to go and stay if they didn't feel safe. So in really thinking through what the issues that we possibly might take for granted. And then also the Co-op, they've taken targets to, I mean, there's so many examples, and of course I'm going to upset those that I don't mention, and it's a terrible thing. But the targets to double representation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic marriages, and a whole new curriculum on anti-racism. So again, we've got some phenomenal, interesting work coming through on that. So I hope everyone's feeling the kind of resolve to get after this stuff in a way that we perhaps haven't felt before, or certainly for quite some time. So I think that lends itself to Sky being an exemplar, Jeremy. No pressure.
Well, I think, to me, one of the interesting things from a business point of view last year was the sort of intensity of learning. And it was almost a sort of little, lab environment, if you like, of how businesses can operate differently. And so what I'm taking away is some really, really important ideas, I think, for the future. I mean, I think we will change the way we work, for example, in Sky forever. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it was, because we've learned there can be some incredible positives there. We want to be unequivocal in our commitment to the things that matter. So for us, that's like getting to net zero carbon by 2030, being a real leader on the environment. I think this decade will be the decade that is decisive on our response to climate change. It's about really understanding the impact we can have in ordinary people's lives and really valuing that and making sure that we want to build on that and make it even better. And then I think probably more than anything, the sort of sense of business in and of itself as a community, a network of people. And one of the things that I've taken, a huge amount of, kind of strength and pride out of is the way we've looked after all of our people. And that doesn't just have to exist through a crisis like we've faced. That can be an everyday response to how we think about business and how we think about all of our colleagues. So I think, when the noise of this year gradually settles down, we get to a vaccine and things start to return to normal, for me, it's really important to not lose sight of the kind of big insights that we can use for the future to build ever not just bigger businesses, but better businesses too.
Well, yes, and the challenge with a call to action like Build Back Responsibly is to turn words into action. And this is a global challenge, not just one that we're facing here in the UK. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to talk about this with someone who has that perspective of global leadership, business and campaigning too. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton agreed to share her thoughts with us here at Responsible Business Live. So Jeremy and I recently sat down with Secretary Clinton to discuss this, and she told us that business as well as government must step up and play its part in the recovery of communities and economies around the globe. So first of all, I want to say a very warm welcome to you, Secretary Clinton, for joining us. I'm here with Jeremy Darroch, and we're delighted that you could be here with us for Responsible Business Live. And we've been talking a lot about how businesses big and small are dealing with the pandemic, and it's clear that its impact's going to be felt not just over the coming months, but potentially for years to come. So it seems very important to make sure that we now build up community resilience. So Secretary Clinton, I'm really interested to know what you think that businesses and communities can do to work together to build back better. What actions do you think need to be taken?
Well, Anna, it's a great pleasure to be here with you and Jeremy for this conversation. And it's an incredibly timely one, particularly in the United States right now with the aftermath of our election. I think there are several things that I hope people will think about, and it has to be a combination of government action and business action in order to get us back on our feet. It's really important to focus on small and medium-sized businesses because, at least in the United States, they've been devastated. Many will not open again, and because we are in the midst of an incredible wave of infection and death again, many more will be shut down as part of the efforts to mitigate the virus. And I think larger businesses in particular have an opportunity in the communities that they are located in and serve to think about simple things like, procurement, supply lines. How do you support the vibrancy of the small and medium-sized businesses in the areas where you are physically located, as well as whatever the reach of your business might be, further afield. I think it's also important for bigger businesses to recognize the essential job of government to support workers and their enterprises. I think that from what I know, the UK and Europe have done a little better job than the United States has, because in many places you paid for businesses to keep people employed as opposed to just letting them go and then putting them on government unemployment payments. We did not do that. And those payments in our country are running out. So the amount of economic pain and loss is only going to increase in the United States, which is going to be a big challenge for President-elect Biden. And the final point I would quickly make is women have been disproportionately affected by the COVID crisis. They have been laid off often from the jobs that they had, and they are facing terrible dilemmas of how to go back to work and take care of their children if they have children. And so there has to be some accommodation and recognition of the disproportionate impact on women's employment if we're going to be able to get the economy back going again.
And Jeremy, your business has been on the front line of the pandemic in many ways, keeping people connected through television, through broadband, through mobile, keeping them informed through Sky News as well. So what have you learned about leading through change, and how do you think that businesses can learn from the turbulence and shock of a pandemic to build back better?
I think in moments like this, it can be easy to feel a little overwhelmed. And you hear a lot about that from businesses because, of course, for many businesses, there's huge pressures that are put on them in the short term. And, of course, we've all got to get through that. I think the big lessons I've got, though, is I think at times like this, it's really important that you go back to the fundamentals of what any business is about. And for me, that's all about our brand promise as a business. And also about our people, you know, and I think our brand promise is not just about the products we sell. It's not just the consumer brand, if you think of it that way. It's also about the communities that we serve. It's about the societies that we live in and that we rely on, and it's about, you know, perhaps the edges of those societies, perhaps the more minority groups that aren't always taken care of. And I think businesses can play a particular role in helping those communities with a belief system that they are the things that nurture the business and reward the business day in, day out. And then I think the very best leaders and the very best businesses will also be thinking about how they emerge. I mean, much will stay the same from this, but quite a lot will be different, I think, and a lot of change will be accelerated. So businesses that are thinking about how they want to come out of this particular crisis will be important. And of course, as part of that, you know, we're very reliant on the kind of political infrastructure and the political leadership that's around us to provide the right macro that then businesses and business networks can plug into. I'd be delighted, Secretary Clinton, to just hear how you think about that kind of political macro, what you see, you know, in the US and elsewhere in the world, and how you think that's shaping up.
You know, Jeremy, I think that's the big question for everybody. I can tell you here in the US, the economic consequences are not stable. They are deteriorating once again. And there is no help coming in what we call the lame duck session. In other words, Trump is still in the office, but no longer going to be president as of January 20th. And so we're trying to figure out, how do you forge a bipartisan consensus to help people right now? Because the further down you go, the harder it will be to lift back up to something resembling, you know, stability, to provide a platform to build back better. Internationally, I think that different countries have chosen different approaches, and I'm curious about what's working better. You know, what has brought about the least damaging economic impact on people's lives? What kinds of lessons can we all learn from each other? I wish that there were more cross-country conversations, business conversations like the one that, you know, you're leading right now, because we all need to figure out what are best practices and how do we deploy them in the context of each of our economies and our political situations.
And Secretary Clinton, this clearly has many months yet to run. And bearing that in mind, how concerned are you that the good work that many businesses have done on other important issues like inclusivity, like diversity, are you worried they'll become less of a priority while businesses are coping with this crisis? And tell us a bit about your own experience. To what extent do you feel that you've been treated differently because you're a woman in the workplace? And to what extent does that inform how important you think the issues are?
You know, Anna, I think that a lot of these priorities, not just inclusivity and diversity, but sustainability when it comes to climate change, for example, trying to expand the definition of stakeholder capitalism. So as Jeremy just said, businesses are focused not just on the shareholder and the bottom line, but more broadly on the larger community. I think all of those are at risk. And it will be important for businesses to constantly be asking themselves, how do we get through this without giving up on a lot of the values and the programs that we were, committed to? Take inclusivity and diversity. As I said earlier, getting women back to work, and again, I'm speaking primarily from the U.S. perspective, is going to be really difficult. New York City, our largest school system, 1 million children just shut down again. Now, for women who were kind of inching back into the workforce, childcare is shut down. Obviously, schools are shut down. It's still very concerning to have strangers in your home. There is no option for them other than to drop out of the workforce or to get some kind of arrangement with their employer that will enhance their ability, if they can, to do their job from home. But there are lots of frontline jobs you cannot do from home. And so with the loss of women in the workforce, focusing on that problem is going to require a lot of serious thought. And, if women are out of the workforce for another, let's say 8-10 months, how are they going to be integrated back in? Are they going to be given the chance to, come back where they left off from? I mean, those are all serious personnel, human relations kinds of questions that need to be asked. And look, I think any woman in the workforce, particularly someone like me who's been in the workforce for a very long time, we've seen the ups and downs, and we've seen the assumptions and the stereotypes and the double standard. But I did have the feeling that business was becoming much more aware and more self-reflective about some of those assumptions. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want us to, because we're under pressure on so many fronts, to kind of revert back to the lowest common denominator. So I think there will have to be a lot of, frankly, soul searching on the part of business leadership to make sure that inclusivity and diversity remain a goal, to make sure that as we're building back better, and I applaud Sky for this, how do we also do more on sustainability and climate change? I think it's going to take some different thinking than we've had in the last few decades.
So, Jeremy, let's pick up on that issue of sustainability, because there are people that say this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build back a really green recovery. And as Secretary Clinton was hinting there, you've committed to making Sky net zero carbon by 2030. But do you worry that the COVID crisis will force you to water down some of your ambitions? Are you worried about potentially missing that target, for example?
So no, because we're not going to allow it to do that. And actually, if anything, we're going to go even further. I think if you stand back from this whole event reminds us of how connected we are, how exposed the natural world and all of its forms are. And I don't see any of that changing. I think that's going to be one of the things that broadly comes back. So I think the question is, therefore, how do we ensure that in that world that we're bringing the broad areas of sustainability and environmentalism in particular much more into the mainstream, so that it becomes right at the center and the flow of businesses. So we are very, very committed at Sky to do that. And I think, some things have changed enormously. The amount of investment that's going to go into infrastructure in pretty much every developed economy is probably unthinkable versus where we were a year ago. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, genuine opportunity for us to create a much, much greener economies, infrastructures, companies. And everybody has got a responsibility to get on board and play their piece. And I think any business, in our network, there are hundreds of businesses, large and small. But you're starting to see some brilliant examples of businesses really make change. I could look at the work that Bentley are doing on electric cars, that Airbus are doing around genuinely net zero air transport. A business like Jacobs, a very small business, their commitment to go to net zero carbon very, very early. Microsoft would be another good example. And we're starting to see business leaders and businesses emerge that are really thinking about how that affects their business in the future. And I think it's an exciting opportunity for us all, and we've all got our role to play, I think.
So there are exciting opportunities, but Secretary Clinton, we can't get away from the fact that this crisis has been very difficult for everyone, but it also has placed an extra burden on people in leadership roles. And you're someone who knows a lot about leadership. You've had a huge number of those roles in your time, from First Lady to New York Senator to Secretary of State to the Democratic candidate for president. So what have you learned from those roles about dealing with change and dealing with crisis and finding a sense of purpose and strength?
You know, Anna, I think this is a crisis for leadership and of leadership, because a lot of the challenges that we've been dealing with have been laid bare. And the inequality, in our case, racial justice issues, as Jeremy was just saying, the sustainability issues. This is a wake-up call for leadership, both in business and in government. And I can only hope that a critical mass of leaders are going to respond. So when you think about the challenges of climate for our purposes here, the United States has been locked in a very self-destructive debate for too long. And there has been a real reluctance to get too far out ahead of that debate. And consequently, we haven't made as much progress as we should, either domestically or internationally. I think that will change with President-elect Biden. He's committed to making it change, and he's going to have to fight against some pretty powerful political headwinds. And here's where business can make a big difference, because most of the opposition to the changes that have been required to move toward more renewable energy, to set those, those carbon standards, to try to do what Jeremy said Sky is doing to get to, net zero carbon. They've been, unfortunately, led by businesses who have just lived in the short term. And their short-term benefits outweigh the long-term problems and, frankly, crises that will face them and everybody else in society. So even though I think the public opinion has shifted, I think leadership is going to have to take on the remaining opponents of drastic changes in the next 10 years.
And Secretary Clinton, obviously, it's fascinating to see what's needed from leaders, but on a personal level, what's it like to be in a position of responsibility when things are going badly? How do you find the motivation to keep going and to lead others as well? How have you found it personally when things have not gone to plan?
Well, yeah, that's happened to me a few times. But look, I think if you are in political leadership, I obviously can't speak to business leadership. You have to be very honest about what your motivations are. If you're there just because you like the adulation and the perks that come with being in political office, and you sort of move with whichever way the wind is blowing, I don't think you face these difficult, even existential questions about how to shoulder the responsibility for dealing with real problems. Back in December of 2008, 12 years ago now, when then President-elect Obama called and asked me to be Secretary of State, he sort of summed up the problem by saying, we have the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and we have a lot of problems around the world. I can't do both. I have to focus on the economy. I want you to be Secretary of State and start rebuilding our relationships. You have to, number one, be willing to step forward and take the slings and arrows that go with making difficult decisions. And you have to be motivated because you believe that you can make a difference, and you can make a difference in people's lives and the future of your country and dealing with very difficult global problems. That doesn't make it personally easier, because you're still going to be criticized and even attacked by people who don't agree with you or people who want to bring you down. But if you have that core sense of purpose, it gets you through a lot. And that's been my saving grace. I was a senator from New York on 9/11, and it was the most devastating personal experience I've ever had. And to have to find ways to help rebuild New York, to deal with the threat of terrorism, to help people's lives who've been shattered, you know, it gave me a real sense of motivation. And you have to get out of yourself and see what is happening to other people in order to carry with you that sense of responsibility and, as I say, purposefulness.
And Jeremy, do you agree with that? And what role do you think positivity and optimism plays when dealing with this kind of crisis? I mean, what have you learned about leading through change and planning for the best as well as preparing for the worst?
What got me into business was this idea of business as a force for good, that it's part of the social fabric of communities and actually it could affect real change that's broader than the sort of narrowness of financials and results to have lasting impact on communities in which it works. That's why I've essentially stayed in business. And I think, you know, a mindset underneath that is, you know, that is grounded, of course, but is optimistic and positive and has a belief that things can get better and we can improve things and we can impact things, can have a ripple effect across an organization. And I think it's pretty clear now in the science that if you have that approach, you know, you can transform an individual mindset, optimistic mindset, to an organizational mindset that is optimistic. And once you transfer an organization to being optimistic, you know, suddenly you're on the march.
Secretary Clinton, what's your advice to the next generation of business leaders?
I am hopeful that, you know, the next generation of business leaders, as well as the next generation of political leaders, will have a broader perspective, will have a better sense of how to balance all the competing concerns that are facing them. You know, I think business leaders have a tremendous role to play in helping to shape the future, not just in terms of products and services, obviously we know that, but in a sense of social responsibility and commitment to larger goals that will make the world safer and more prosperous and will actually create a better climate for business going forward. You know, I remember, you know, my father, who served in World War II, when he got out of the service, all he wanted to do was start his small business. And he had a really small business, and start his family and buy a house. And Jeremy and I were talking before we went on. My father's family is from the same part of northeastern England that Jeremy's family comes from. And so, you know, when after World War II, visionary leaders like President Truman and Dean Acheson and leaders in the UK and elsewhere said, you know what, we're going to have to rebuild these economies of the countries we have just fought a war with to lift everybody up. And in the United States, that meant we're going to have to spend a huge amount of American taxpayer money to do that. And, you know, people like my father, a very conservative small businessman, he got that. You know, I don't think he ever expected that he was going to be shipping. He was in textiles, shipping his textiles in the early 1950s to Europe. That wasn't his dream. But he got the fact that if you didn't rebuild and if you didn't pay to rebuild and build back better, as Joe Biden says, then it would have a ripple effect that would impact him. We've got to reignite that sense of larger awareness of what, you know, self-interest and success actually mean. And I think business leaders can play a big role in doing just that.
Well, Secretary Clinton, we really appreciate your insights today. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome now Ozzy Clarke-Binns, who's worked with BITC since 2012, chairing its National Youth Advisory Panel for several years, which was set up to advise BITC's network about responsible business practices from a youth perspective. And Ozzy, you're also head of innovation consultancy at University College London. You're a trustee at the Royal National Institute of Blind People and an ambassador for One Young World, a key partner of BITC, of course. And you were also involved in that research that Amanda mentioned earlier about shaping the agenda to build back responsibly. So it'll be really interesting to get your insights given all of that. So I'm really interested to know what you made of Secretary Clinton's comments there. As an ambassador for One Young World, do you feel they align with what young leaders are currently focused on?
Yes, and I think in many ways, the title of the report from BITC is Fix Up. And that's largely what Secretary Clinton is talking about, is the need for businesses, for political leaders to step up to the plate. I think when I talk to my friends, when I talk to my peers, we see what is a deficit in leadership at this moment in time. Politically, I think it's very fair to say many leaders aren't stepping up to the challenge, not doing what they need to. They are missing in action. I think when we look at the election of President-elect Joe Biden, for example, America, like many other places around the world, has a huge number of great ills that existed before the pandemic. Things relating to poverty, gender-based violence, the climate crisis, racism, all need to be tackled. And my fear, and my friends' fear is that if we don't have progressive policies, if we're not really pushing the boundaries of what's possible, Jeremy said earlier, if we're not throwing out the rule book and saying what's different, how do we move forward from this point onwards, we are going to have these issues recurring again and again. And the pandemic has supercharged them in many ways. If we look at this country, last year the UN found that poverty in this country was disproportionately affecting people of colour, women, single parents, people with disabilities. And these are the same groups who are disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And poverty has continued to surge. And so when we talk about leadership, we see the government on one hand fight tooth and nail not to feed the poorest children in this country. But on the other side, we see individuals, we see businesses step up and step in to feed children valiantly. And I think as young people, what we want is action. It's something that everyone has said a lot today, and we're tired of the words. Now is the time and the opportunity for action, and more importantly, what the pandemic has shown us is action is possible.
And so how would you sum up what you think businesses' priorities be when building back?
I think if I start with what I said earlier about poverty, I think that's an important one. I think the time has probably come for us to really have a real living wage as the minimum wage across this country. Many of the people we were clapping for, we are supporting as key workers who have helped keep this country moving, are some of the poorest and lowest paid in our country. And I think it's time for a new settlement for them. Secretary Clinton talks about after World War II. In this country, we talk about the settlement of 1945. And I think it's time for us to have some of those bigger, bolder policies and start to put those in place. I think there's the other thing here, and I can't not mention, which is about tackling racism. It's great to see so many businesses, I think it's from like 200 to over 500 plus businesses have signed up to the Race at Work Charter, and that's fantastic. And in the year of BLM, when we were motivated by action across the world, at the height of a pandemic, and I think this is really important to emphasize, people took to the streets, to protest racism around the world, in every part of this world. And I think, therefore, we need to see businesses step in and change. If we're here a year from now, another BITC AGM, we want to hear about how more black people have been promoted, more black people have been appointed to boards, more people are in leadership positions. The NASDAQ in the US, for example, have put forward to the Securities and Exchanges Commission that companies can be delisted if they don't have at least one board member or director who is a woman and at least one director who is a person of colour or identifies as LGBT. And I think those progressive policies are very, very important. And finally, I can't not say climate change. We're here at Sky, we've seen what Sky is committed to around net zero by 2030. We need to see more of that, and we need to go further because we have one world. And if we're not looking after it, where are we all going to live?
Ozzy, thanks so much. Really interesting to get your take on things. Thank you. So, Amanda, we were looking there to the future with Ozzy, but I also want to take you back now to the origins of business in the community and BITC's royal founding patron, who's been talking about these issues around responsibility in business for years now.
Absolutely, he has. And back in 1982, when he founded us, he was all too aware that for a business to be truly healthy, it had to have a healthy community and a healthy environment, and those three had to be intrinsically linked. If you think in the 1970s, he was doing his first speeches on plastic. 25 years ago, he launched the RACE campaign for business in the community. So he's absolutely been at the forefront of that. So I think it's probably fair to say that he's supporting our agenda and more committed to it than ever. And so it's with great pleasure to introduce his words and reflections on an extraordinary year for us and our royal founding patron and the Responsible Business Network, of which we're all part, in which he takes great pride. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so pleased that I'm able to deliver this message for the inaugural Responsible Business Live broadcast. That you have risen to the challenge of orchestrating your first virtual gathering in such style is by no means a surprise, for the responsible business movement has always shown itself to be capable of meeting extraordinary challenges. For very nearly 4 decades, I've been adamant about the vital role that business has to play in communities. After all, that ambition was one of the foundation stones of business in the community itself, back in 1982. At the time, we may not have had a global pandemic in mind, but in many ways, the National Business Response Network is the ultimate realization of the dream that we shared almost 40 years ago. I need hardly say how immensely grateful I am to every business leader who has had the courage to support it. I have no doubt that those who have done so have changed countless lives. Another founding principle of business in the community was the strength of leading by doing. This is why I appreciate so much the tireless work of my responsible business ambassadors in leading action and driving engagement across the United Kingdom. While expressing my warmest thanks to all of you, I particularly want to welcome the new business leaders who have accepted this role. Separately, each one of you achieves so much, but together you can be a powerful force. Led by my indomitable National Ambassador, Dame Vivian Hunt, you are in an ideal position to drive change at speed and scale. Now, I must say, although none of us can be certain of what the months ahead hold, one thing is not in doubt. We must ensure businesses and communities are able to build back better by putting urgently needed and genuinely sustainable business practices at the heart of their operations as they begin to recover from this ghastly coronavirus pandemic. As members of Business in the Community's Responsible Business Network, you are uniquely placed to lead the charge on decarbonising our economy as we rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. In this regard, I do so hope that you will be able to collaborate closely with my Sustainable Markets Initiative and its Secretariat in order to help demonstrate that the global private sector holds the key to solving the climate and biodiversity emergency we face. In particular, it has been an enormous pleasure to work with Jeremy Darroch, Business in the Community's chairman. Jeremy's leadership has been exemplary, not just in his wise counsel throughout this last year, but in the focus and drive which he has given to this organisation in the past 3 years. Jeremy is a tireless advocate for responsible business and the need to make the world a fairer and more sustainable place. Now, if I may, I would like to end by welcoming Gavin Patterson as the new chairman of Business in the Community. I rather doubt that he knows quite what he has taken on, especially with regard to the patron of Business in the Community, but I am delighted that he has accepted the role and I look forward to working with him. Ladies and gentlemen, the need for corporate social, environmental and financial responsibility has never been greater. I wish all of you the very best as you continue to make your contributions to the greatest challenges of our time.
And so congratulations to the 3 new ambassadors His Royal Highness mentioned. They are Rebecca Wallace, Director of People and Corporate Responsibility at Ricoh UK, Helen Kay, a partner at Deloitte, and Lee Meller, Vice President Europe at SC Johnson. And Jeremy, what a tribute to you there.
Well, it's wonderful to hear His Royal Highness talk about the network in such glowing terms. And I think it's a recognition of the progress that Amanda and the whole team have made. And we should pay our own tribute to His Royal Highness as well. You know, he has been our founding patron. It was his vision that really established this whole idea of the network. And he's been, of course, the constant over so many years. And I know from my own experience of working with him, which has been just so enjoyable, because his challenge, his encouragement I think is one of the things that really courses through the organisation and creates action. So it's been just a great opportunity to work with him for a short period of time and help Amanda and the team achieve so much. And I'd also like just to send my own best wishes and welcome to all the new ambassadors, but also thank everybody who's involved in this bigger idea, all of the companies and individuals who contribute at whatever level to the work that the network does. And I know that Gavin's going to be a fantastic chairman. I think he's going to be really tremendous. I know he's super excited about the opportunity, and I think he's, with Amanda, going to take the organisation and the network to even higher levels, I think.
Well, let's hear from him, shall we? We can hear from Gavin Patterson now.
First, I want to thank His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, for his endorsement of business in the community. As His Highness said, responsible business is crucial to our recovery after a year of pandemic disruption. It will be an honour to work alongside your royal patron in steering this organisation. It is an equal honour to take over from Jeremy Darroch as chair. I've got to know Jeremy over many years as a colleague, a business partner, as a customer and as a friend. Over the past 3 years, Jeremy has championed business in the community as the voice of responsible business, a voice that has gained importance amid multiple uncertainties over Brexit, over economic demand, over regulations, new technology and sustainability. And in this year, in its ability to mobilise members around the emergency response needed to support communities through the pandemic. I will work with Amanda and the board to help business address these uncertainties responsibly. In the 2020s, we are facing the biggest structural change in generations, a scale of change crystallised this year by the pandemic. To adapt, we must expand our network to ensure the UK is a global beacon of responsible business. This will be crucial in a year which Britain holds the G7 presidency, hosts COP26 and exits the EU. I will also prioritise digital connectivity. As president of Salesforce, I know digital connectivity is essential. So I want to ensure UK businesses can have equal opportunity to access the connectivity needed to grow in the 2020s. To achieve this, we must close the digital skills gap throughout the workforce. In executing on this agenda, I look forward to connecting with you regularly, virtually and hopefully in person. We face a challenging period, but also a period of opportunity. Reflecting my lifelong support for Liverpool Football Club, I will end by saying business in the community is here to ensure you'll never walk alone. Thank you for entrusting me with this role. I aim to repay that trust in the years ahead.
So, Amanda, to conclude, it's undoubtedly been a tough year, but there's a real sense that there are real opportunities ahead too.
I couldn't agree more, absolutely. And so I think if we I can't help but, we are the network, all our members we are only as strong as that network. And so I feel we should just go forth with that determination and that resolve and really begin to tackle some of the things that we've heard a lot about today. So at the very end, there's a video with some incredible histories in that about building back responsibly. So after we finish, just really reflect on that and the amazing content that is available for all our members, which grows and gets better every day.
Well, Amanda, thanks very much indeed.
Thank
you to you, Jeremy, as well. And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us as well this afternoon. And I will leave you now with one final reminder. Right now on the National Business Response Network platform, there's a surge of requests from communities around the UK, a reflection of desperate need from organisations who are struggling to cope. So if you can help, please do call the phone line. Remember, together, business can make a real difference.
We're not just about the commercial gains. Clearly we're facing considerable commercial challenges, as most organisations are, but it's important to remember that we're part of something bigger, and we have a role to play in that.
The research tells us that diverse organisations are 6 times more likely to be more innovative. They're 6 times more likely to deliver to targets and be that much more agile, and twice as likely to actually achieve and exceed financial targets. So it's a win-win. As we look back, we can't miss this moment to play our part in delivering equality as an organisation and as a co-op.
The world needs to sort out the climate challenge. It's not just for BP, it's not just for our peers in our industry. We're all in this, so we all need to do it. So we need to make sure that we can be both, responsible and obviously viable and commercially minded, and that's what we will do.
We have seen through the pandemic many young people's academic development and their mental health being significantly affected. I think businesses, government and educators alike need to collaborate to address that, and we certainly in KPMG want to be part of helping all young people, and particularly young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, to benefit from education and to have a greater opportunity as a result of the pandemic, not less.
People are the foundation of all of our businesses. It's easy to say, but it's absolutely true. So it's critical that we look after their health if we want healthy and thriving organisations. We all have mental health in the same way we all have physical health. We've got to make sure they're equal and that colleagues can get the support they need across both mental and physical health.
Businesses have a responsibility, and more so than ever, to actually give back. Use their resources, use the skills that we have to come together, work collaboratively with other organisations, with other charities, to actually make a difference.
If you invest responsibly for the long term, if you look after all stakeholders, if you look after sustainability and social impact, if you are mindful of environmental impacts, if you look after governance, if you care about the holistic outcome of your investment, what you end up doing is maximizing your return. And we find this is true, in fact, across the board in all the sectors we invest in.